Today, I'll be talking about the work I did this quarter in supporting help seeking during office hours for winter quarter. So, to give a quick overview of what I'll be talking about, first, I'll give a quick summary of the work I did this quarter. Then, I'll talk about why we're interested in Intro CS specifically, and of the problems in Intro CS, why we're interested in office hours. Then, I'll go over some interview findings I have from talking to students throughout the quarter, as well as some related work based on literature I've read in the field and areas that I'm interested in. And then finally, I'll touch on my upcoming plans for next quarter. So, throughout winter quarter, I started with exploring the problem space that I was interested in. During fall quarter, I started quite broad and eventually was able to narrow down to being interested in CS1 and /Intro CS and help seeking during Intro CS. But since I wasn't sure where in the help seeking process I was interested in, I did some exploratory design arguments to see what possible problems and solutions might look like. And early on in the quarter, I had a status update to get feedback on those directions and which areas seemed promising. Based on gaps that I saw in my understanding from both my work in the beginning of the quarter as well as from the previous quarter, I began doing student interviews with students taking CS211, the CS2 equivalent at Northwestern. I interviewed 6 students, and using that interview data, I did open coding and thematic analysis to surface patterns that emerged among students. I also reviewed related work and literature in the space and aggregated a lot of those papers and studies into an initial approach tree to kind of map out and understand where my work was situated in the literature. And finally, I began planning a study for next quarter that would try and address a lot of the gaps that I was able to surface this quarter, and developed initial study design and started working on the IRB application for that. So, why are we interested in Intro CS? This slide is pretty much the same slide I used last quarter to describe why we're interested in Intro CS because these factors still remain true today. Computer science is becoming increasingly popular, both among college students entering universities as well as in the job market itself. And as this interest balloons, courses have to deal with more and more students while not having their resources scale in the same way. And so, any way that can be used to improve the learning experience in computer science is quite useful. Furthermore, intro courses specifically are an extremely common entry point to computer science, especially among those who are not well represented in the field, such as women and underrepresented minorities, who are often going to be having their first experiences with code and first experiences with computer science at the university level. So this becomes a good opportunity to get those people involved, but in general, students often report that computer science courses, especially if they don't have prior experience, can be quite challenging. And so we want to improve retention as much as we can. Among the problems in Intro CS, office hours is what I've chosen to focus on because it is pretty much the most common way that students get help in universities. A really good reason and popular reason for why office hours are so common is because teaching assistants scale with the size of undergraduate courses. As there are more undergraduate students taking Intro CS, there's a larger pool of potential undergraduate TAs to help with those courses. And office hours specifically is a great opportunity for students to get all kinds of different help in face-to-face interactions with TAs that they can't get just from doing things like asking questions during a lecture. Furthermore, help seeking is something that we pretty much expect to always be occurring in Intro CS courses and is a necessary step when self-regulating during an Intro CS course. However, it's hard to intervene when students are working on their own and during the precursor steps that lead to help seeking during office hours. So office hours itself, as being a part of the kind of system that exists in an intra-CS space, is a great intervention point for offering help and improving help. Furthermore, we have reason to believe that office hours as they are definitely not perfect and still can be improved. And so I'm interested in finding out exactly where that can happen. So looking to the findings, we did 30-minute semi-structured interviews with the 6 students that I talked to. The interviews focused specifically on the students' process and experiences with homework assignments, as well as specific office hours experiences they've had in the past. All the students I talked to were currently taking CS211, which is a CS2 course, uses C language, goes over things like algorithms and data structures. Of the students I talked to, almost all of them but one attended office hours at least once at the time of the interview. Interviewees were mostly split between around half of them having low confidence and the other half being in the medium to medium high area. After going over the interview data and doing some analysis, I was able to surface about 3 common general themes among the students. The first theme was concerns regarding cost and perceived cost of attending office hours. Often this manifested in forms of students talking about office hours, attending office hours because it was convenient to do so, or because it was perceived as being too inconvenient to do so, as well as a lot of students talking about needing to anticipate the cost of office hours and plan for it as part of their homework process. The second area that I was able to see was misalignments that occurred between students and TAs with regards to the help that students needed and the help that they received. This was a particularly interesting theme because I think it's where a lot of students seem to get more emotional and involved during the interviews. Pretty much the biggest concern in this area is when a student goes in the office hours expecting to get help on one thing, but then afterwards feels like they received help for another thing that they weren't anticipating and didn't think they needed, and that creating a lot of frustration. And I'll get into that in the next slide. And the third theme was students avoiding help because they didn't feel comfortable or perceived a professor or TA being unfriendly or not as welcoming to their help seeking. Specifically, the 2 female students who I interviewed both noted that they did not go to office hours with the professor, but did go to office hours with student TAs. And of those students, one of them specifically stated they didn't go to the professor's office hours because they found him intimidating. The findings I thought were really interesting, or the theme I thought was really interesting, was with misalignments, however. And so to get into that a little bit more, I continued to look through the interviews and was able to surface these 2 initial passes at what I think the dimensions of misalignments seem to be. So in terms of the parts of help seeking that can exist, I found 5 areas, which were what students need, what students think they need, what students ask for, what TAs think the student needs, and the actual help that TAs give. So if at any point these become misaligned, issues occur with the help seeking. The second dimension is these kind of types of help or levels of question depth that seem to exist when students ask questions. So there could be, at the very surface level, logistical help, such as semantics about the assignment spec or simple things like that, ranging to conceptual level help about concepts that were discussed in lecture and need to be understood by students to be able to implement things into their homework assignments. I've also included 2 quotes on this slide that I think do a good job of providing examples of these misalignments. So the first quote is from a student who we'll call N. She said when talking about an interaction with a TA during office hours, her first advice, which was kind of annoying, was to just be like, oh, hey, just write some tests and see if it works. I'm like, bro, I could have stayed in my dorm room if I wanted to write tests. I didn't come here so you could tell me to write some freaking tests. I came here so you could look at my code and tell you what's wrong. I can write a test any day of the week. You're not here to tell me to do that, you know? I thought this quote was pretty interesting because at the time, N was quite emotional during when she was talking about this. And you see her having one expectation for the help that she wanted to get while receiving different help from the TA when she asked for help. So we see a misalignment there. The second quote is from a student we'll call C. He said, also when talking about going to office hours and talking to a TA, so I went in and I'm like, have a question about this code. And they're like, oh, you just have to fix this small part of it. And I fixed it, and for the time being, it worked. I'm like, cool, I'm done. And then I walked out, went back to my dorm, and started writing more code onto that function, and it totally fell apart. So then, I had to completely redo the function again. Here, C never actually challenged the help that he received from the TA in the moment. However, the help he asked for on the code level didn't end up being the help that he actually needed. So there was a misalignment there that the TA wasn't able to identify in the moment, and so the TA helped with the wrong thing. Despite all of these findings, however, there are still a lot of open questions about these misalignments, pretty much on all dimensions of how you would want to quantify these. We still aren't sure which misalignments are happening most frequently, which ones are having the most significant impacts on students' help that they're receiving, or which ones are taking the longest to deal with or the hardest to deal with. Looking to the literature to try and see if anybody has addressed this, I couldn't really find anything with regards to alignments and misalignments specifically, but I was able to find a body of work about ways of offering help. I've summarized them on this slide, but the ones I think are interesting to talk about are queuing systems that are offered during office hours. Queuing systems, basically, you go to office hours, you put your name in a laptop or something or on a website, and TAs, and then that puts you in a queue and TAs will get to you. These often offer quite shallow but basic scaffolds for help seeking, such as asking students, what do you want help with and what have you tried already? And they also can collect data on what students are saying because they're capturing that passively. And TAs can also provide that data. But it is quite shallow because these are normally very lightweight and they don't really capture what's happening during the interaction. And specifically in the Wren study where this was used, TAs were assumed to basically put the quote-unquote right answer for classifying help and things like that, when based on interviews I've done, there's not really, you can't necessarily trust that TAs are always going to identify these things correctly. When we're looking at lab settings where you have students working on certain types of problems and having TAs available for help, the LOXA study provides some scaffolds in the way that TAs offer help by guiding students through a script of questions when they ask questions. But these questions are tailored to the lesson that students are working on or the process structure they're following and don't generalize well to open-ended questions that students may have. So to help address these gaps in understanding, specifically with regards to the actual interactions and misalignments that are happening between students and TAs, I began working on an initial study design to do more need-finding work in this space. So I came up with an initial study plan where I was interested in recording and capturing the student and TA interactions that occur during office hours, and then following up on those interactions with students and TAs by interviewing them and or surveying them to understand their perspectives. In light of the virtualization of the next quarter, however, I've begun adjusting that study to account for virtual help seeking that might occur, such as recording virtual office hours instead of in-person office hours, and also considering scraping data from discussion and QA forums, such as Piazza. Of course, to run a study, I need to get IRB approval, so I'm also working on the IRB application for that as well. So, looking forward to seeing what I might find next quarter. Very pleased with what I've been able to find so far. Thanks for watching.